Hey, it's David Brody from Elvis Duran in the Morning Zoo. Here's part 2 of my interview with Joe Satriani. In this part, I'm talking to him about his good friend and fellow guitar player Steve Vai, how Steve was in a lot of 80s metal bands, and I asked him if he ever considered doing the same. Now, he's done a lot more hired gun stuff than you. I mean, you played with Deep Purple and Mick Jagger, but he's played with Whitesnake, and he played with David Lee Roth. Do you ever look back and think, gee, I wish I was in a hair band for a little while? or are you kind of glad that was never really what you did?
You know, that's a real interesting question because when opportunities came up for me, I remember quite clearly Steve telling me, boy, if you can avoid replacing somebody famous in a band, do it, because he had a rough time being the guy, who replaced Warren in Frank Zappa, and then he replaced Yngwie, and then he in a way people thought that he was replacing John Sykes.
Yep.
And then, obviously, playing with David Lee Roth, he was pitted up against Eddie Van Halen. And, Steve is really a solo tour de force on his own. And for the audience out there, the world audience, thinking that he's simply the guy that's replaced all these guys, it's really, I think it kind of drove him crazy for a while there. So I think when he finally got his solo career going, it was a relief because he could truly be himself and show everybody, what he was capable of, So I remember that as sort of like a lesson, like, yeah, Steve said, be careful of that, And so I actually turned down quite a few offers because I thought, if I can just do my own thing, that's going to be much more fun, and I think the fans are going to enjoy it more because it's going to be more concentrated and more unique, and I won't have to be sort of bent by any sort of commercial concerns,
Well, is there one band that made an offer you could talk about that would surprise your fans the most?
Not really, but there is one thing that I will say that was was crucial. I lost an audition that was one of the best that I ever lost. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
Okay. So this is during the time when I had already recorded my first full-length album, which was called Not of This Earth.
Of course.
And I was preparing to have it sign up like a P&D deal with Relativity Records out of New York before they were bought by Sony. And I was looking around for a gig, and somebody somehow, brought my name up for this band called Jeffria.
Oh, sure.
But I think they were going to call themselves something else. I'm not sure what was happening. They were in the beginning stages. So I did something, I never got to do, which was to fly down to L.A. to do an audition. And I'm, San Francisco based, and it's, they're two different worlds, San Francisco and L.A. So the whole thing was rather surreal for me, just going down there to do this audition in the heart of the sort of the hair band, the hair band capital of the world, right?
Right.
And I've never had that kind of look and everything. And I remember going through this audition, and they were very excited. They wanted me to have the gig, and I said, I got this solo album too. And I thought, they'd be impressed by this kind of thing. And I put on this record, and I could see everyone's face get really concerned, as they were listening to Not of This Earth and, Memories and, the other songs, Hordes of Locusts, some of the other crazy songs that were on there. And I'm flying back, just happened to be flying back to San Francisco with the bass player, and he says, I think it was a big mistake when you whipped out that solo record, man. And I found out, a day later, that I'd lost the audition because they just thought I was too weird. And I thought, that record's not weird. Why would they think that the record's strange, And I remember thinking, and I was feeling kind of weird. Anytime you lose an audition, you don't feel too good about it. And I was thinking, wow, maybe I am weird,
Yeah, well, you know what? The band you were in when you laid down the EP and all thought you were weird when you played it for them from the stories I've read. And
that's right, yeah.
The interviews that I've seen. And I think I just saw a Matt Pinfield interview with you on HDNet where you talked about how, they looked at you like you were crazy.
Yes.
and looking back at Jeffria, and it's funny because there's a Jeffria LP at my desk because we're cleaning out our cabinets here, our radio station's moving. And so I'm grabbing all the hair metal albums that I don't have just for the cool covers. And Jeffria is one of the albums that I'm thinking, Joe, you made the right decision.
I never could have, my hair, I never really had rock and roll hair anyway, so when it fell out, it was sort of like a blessing in disguise, I could put that whole thing behind me. But, they weren't a bad band, and they were a good bunch of guys.
You weren't going to be replacing a guitar legend in that band, so you wouldn't have to worry about what Steve Vai had to worry about.
That's right. Steve always had it rougher. I think the whole thing with replacing Warren and John and Eddie and Yngwie, I mean, whoa, those were some pretty heavy hitters that he had to go up against. And you know, in a way, at the time Steve was doing that, people didn't know the intensity of his artistry. You know, they had no idea because he hadn't put out, you know, the solo records that he's known for now, and people hadn't seen his solo shows, so they actually didn't know the real Steve, you know.
Well, that was part 2 of my interview with Joe Satriani. Thank you very much for following along. Please check out part 3. Joe and I talk about his new album, Professor Sachifunculus and the Mysterion of Rock, as well as his Guitar Center tour and his world tour. Just search for Joe Satriani and David Brody, or search for the Brody blog. I'm David Brody from Elvis Duran and the Morning Zoo. Feel free to email me at zoobrody@gmail.com.